Bring that servant at once. She was scorned until she controlled the Alpha King anger. The castle of King Eric stood like a dark jewel against the twilight sky. Its high towers pierced the clouds, and the winds whispered tales of power and fear through the cold stone corridors. Inside, the great halls glimmered with golden light, yet beneath the gilded beauty lingered shadows where secrets and anger hid. Belisia moved silently along the corridors, her hands steady despite the pounding of her heart. She carried a tray of food for the king, as she had done countless times before. But today, the whispers of the nobles seemed sharper, crueler. Her skirts brushed the cold stones, and she felt eyes following her, judging every step. Bess.
You should have polished these floors better, a maid sneered as Alicia passed. Another servant chuckled behind her hand.
Their laughter was small, but it cut deep. Alicia lowered her eyes, reminding herself that her power was hidden. Humiliation had always followed her in this castle, but so had patience. Her mind drifted to the talisman hidden beneath her cloak, a small, carved stone her mother had left her before she disappeared. Her mother had whispered of its power once, in a voice trembling with both hope and fear.
It bends hearts, child.
But it is dangerous. Never let it rule your will. Alicia had kept it secret, a silent promise to herself and to the memory of her mother. The clamor of the castle changed abruptly as the royal horn sounded. Alicia froze, her heart skipping. That horn rarely called servants. It summoned them only when the king's temper boiled beyond containment. She knew the stories. Servants who had displeased the king faced harsh punishment, sometimes even exile. Bring that servant at once! The words thundered through the halls like a storm breaking. Alicia's name was not spoken, yet she knew it was her fate. Bay. She set the tray down carefully, each step toward the throne room heavier than the last. King Eric sat on his throne, carved of black iron and gold, his presence dominating the chamber. Back. He was a man known for his fury, the Alpha King whose anger could shake kingdoms. Even from a distance, Alicia felt the heat of his gaze. "You!" he barked, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Step forward!" Alicia's hands trembled slightly, but she obeyed. The nobles watched, their whispers a tide of anticipation and cruelty. She bowed low, her head barely lifting to meet his piercing eyes. "You ruined the banquet preparations," he said, his tone sharp as a blade. "Do you understand the chaos you caused? I tried to follow the instructions, Your Majesty," Alicia said softly, her voice steady despite the storm within her. Eric's eyes narrowed, studying her. He leaned forward, his presence suffocating, and for a moment the anger in his eyes seemed endless, unyielding. Yet beneath it, Alicia glimpsed something else. An unexpected flicker of curiosity, as if he were measuring the spirit within her. "You speak with boldness for someone so low in the court," he said slowly, each word deliberate. "Tell me, do you know the cost of your mistake?" Alicia's fingers clenched slightly at her sides. She could have trembled, begged, but something in her stirred, a quiet fire that had been kept hidden for years. "I will accept whatever punishment you deem just, Your Majesty," she said. Her voice carried not fear, but a quiet defiance, the spark of a courage she had not yet revealed to anyone. The king's gaze lingered on her, sharp and searching. Then he straightened, his anger seeming to waver for the briefest moment. Alicia noticed it, though she did not let it show. The talisman pressed against her chest, warm beneath her cloak, as if responding to her courage. "Very well," he said finally, his voice low. "We shall see if your spirit is as strong as your words. Alicia was led to the kitchens where she worked in silence, her mind alive with thoughts and plans. She had endured scorn all her life, yet she had learned that patience could be sharper than any sword. The talisman was small, but it carried a power she had barely begun to understand. At night, when the castle was quiet and the moonlight spilled across the stone floors, she held it in her hands. Whispering her mother's words, she tested its magic, feeling the subtle tug of influence. Her first experiment was simple, nudging the anger in a guard's heart, making him pause and reconsider his harsh words. It worked, and Alicia's breath caught in excitement. But she also sensed danger. The talisman did not bend hearts without cost. It demanded attention, focus, and a careful balance of intention. She knew the risk, yet the allure of controlling her fate, and perhaps even the king's, was intoxicating. Meanwhile, King Eric returned to his chambers, his mind unusually restless. He had seen something in the servant's eyes that unsettled him, an unexpected fire beneath the meek exterior. He paced the floor, his anger simmering yet tinged with curiosity. For the first time in many years, someone had met his presence without crumbling in fear. Someone had dared to hold her head high before him. The days that followed were filled with tension. Every glance, every word exchanged between Alicia and Eric carried unspoken challenges. She tested her influence subtly, nudging situations to calm the king's fury or ease his burdens. Rest. He noticed, sometimes with suspicion, sometimes with an almost reluctant respect. Their encounters became a delicate dance of power, her quiet intelligence against his commanding authority. One evening, Alicia was summoned to the royal gardens to serve the king tea under the moonlight. The air was cool, scented with night-blooming flowers, and the stars shone like scattered diamonds above the towers.
"You move with purpose, servant," Eric said, watching her pour the tea with meticulous care.
Yet I wonder, is it obedience or something else? Alicia's fingers froze briefly on the teacup. Then she continued calmly. Perhaps it is both, Your Majesty. It is difficult to separate what one feels from what one must do. He studied her for a long moment. The quiet wisdom in her words stirred something within him, something long buried beneath years of rage and duty. He felt his anger, which had once been a shield and a weapon, falter under the subtle weight of her presence.
Alicia, sensing the change, felt a thrill of fear and possibility.
The talisman lay hidden beneath her cloak, its warmth pulsing like a heartbeat in tune with her own. She dared to test it gently, whispering her intent for understanding, not control. She felt a shift in Eric, small but undeniable, a loosening of the rigid armor he wore around his heart. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the air between them seemed charged with tension, longing, and unspoken questions. Both understood that something dangerous and extraordinary was unfolding. Suddenly, a distant shout echoed through the gardens. A guard ran past, alert and panicked, carrying news of unrest in the northern gate. The spell of calm was broken. Eric's hand tightened on the cup, his alpha instincts roaring back to life. Yet even as he stood, ready to command and conquer, he looked at Alicia with an intensity that made her heart skip. "You have a gift," he said quietly, almost to himself, "and perhaps a courage I have not seen in many years. Do not underestimate what you can do, or what may happen if you fail."
Alicia nodded, a mixture of fear and exhilaration coursing through her veins.
She understood that this was only the beginning, a delicate and dangerous game of influence, trust, and perhaps, in time, something deeper.
As she returned to the servants' quarters that night, she held the talisman tightly and whispered to herself, "I will not be scorned forever."
Not here. Not now. The castle slept under the pale moonlight, but for Alicia and King Eric, the night was alive with possibilities, power, and peril. Somewhere in the shadows, the talisman pulsed like a heartbeat, hinting at a storm of emotion and destiny yet to come. And as the first stars faded with the dawn, a single thought lingered in both their minds. This is no ordinary servant. And this is no ordinary king. The castle awoke with a dull hum of activity as dawn stretched its pale fingers over the stone towers. Servants hurried along the corridors, carrying supplies and whispers alike, yet none moved with as much quiet precision as Alicia. She had grown accustomed to the shadows of the castle, learning to move between fear and defiance like a practiced dancer. But now she sensed that her world had shifted. King Eric's gaze followed her more often, sharp and unpredictable. There was a storm in his eyes, a mixture of suspicion, curiosity, and, though he would never admit it, something closer to fascination. Bad, Elysia felt it in the tilt of his head, in the way his steps lingered near hers in the great halls, as though he was testing boundaries, measuring her. In the servants' quarters, whispers of her rise had already begun. Some admired her courage, others feared it, yet Elysia paid them little mind. She had a deeper game to play, a dance that required patience, subtlety, and the careful wielding of the talisman her mother had entrusted to her. The talisman pulsed faintly beneath her cloak as she moved through the kitchen. She had discovered its subtle influence on emotions, but the king's anger was a different kind of storm entirely. Still, she dared to experiment, nudging small ripples of calm into the tense atmosphere of the castle. It was dangerous work, but every small success fueled her confidence. That afternoon she was summoned to the king's council chamber. A meeting of nobles awaited her presence, though not as a participant. Her role was simple: deliver refreshments and remain unseen. The chamber was filled with the scent of parchment, incense, and tension. Lords and ladies murmured among themselves, plotting alliances and schemes, but all attention snapped to her as she entered. King Eric's gaze was fixed upon her immediately. Desperate. "Serve quickly," he said, his voice sharp, "and do not falter." Every movement, every glance was calculated. She could feel the talisman thrumming against her chest, urging caution, whispering possibility. A noble nearby sneered at her, trying to provoke a reaction. Alicia's hands shook only slightly, but she did not falter. Instead, she let a subtle warmth radiate from her presence, a silent influence that softened the harshness in the room. Arik noticed. He always noticed. The flicker of surprise in his eyes made her pulse quicken. She had touched the edge of his temper, yet for the first time she had bent it without force. It was exhilarating, terrifying, and intoxicating all at once. After the council ended, Eric lingered. He did not summon her away immediately, but walked with measured steps, studying the sunlight that streamed through the tall windows. His shadow fell over her as he finally spoke.
"You are clever," he said.
And yet, cleverness in the wrong hands can be dangerous. Tell me, are you here to serve, or are you here to test me? Alicia lifted her chin, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "I serve because it is my duty, Your Majesty. I test nothing but myself." The king's eyes lingered on her longer than they should have, his gaze searching, weighing, probing. For the first time he allowed himself a moment of curiosity, untainted by suspicion or anger. And for the first time, Elysia sensed that her presence mattered to him in a way far beyond obedience or fear. The next days passed in a blur of subtle games. Elysia observed, learning the rhythms of the court, noticing the tensions and rivalries among the nobles. She began to predict the king's moods, anticipating when his anger would flare and when it would soften. Best, the talisman allowed her to influence the currents of emotion, just enough to maintain balance without exposing her secret. One evening, the air grew thick with tension. News had arrived that a neighboring kingdom intended to challenge King Eric's authority. The nobles whispered of rebellion, of spies within the castle. Eric's anger simmered like a volcano beneath a frozen surface. Alicia, summoned to bring him a cup of tea, felt the talisman thrum with urgency. "You sense unrest," she said quietly, setting the cup before him. Her words were more than observation. They carried a subtle calm, a coaxing of reason into his stormy mind. Eric's hand paused over the cup, his eyes narrowing. "And you, servant? Double? You feel it too?" His voice was softer than usual, tinged with curiosity. Alicia met his gaze. Beration.
"I do, but anger is not always the answer, Your Majesty."
Patience may serve better than fury.
For a long moment, he said nothing.
Then, unexpectedly, he allowed a small smile to cross his face, a fleeting, almost imperceptible shift. She had touched something in him, even if only briefly. Yet the castle was never still. That same night she found herself wandering the quiet halls, restless. She stopped in the library, her fingers brushing over the spines of old books, seeking wisdom in the words of kings and scholars long gone. The talisman pressed against her chest, warm and insistent, reminding her that her influence over the king was only beginning. Suddenly, a shadow moved among the shelves. Alicia froze, instinctively pressing herself against the wall. A figure stepped forward, Eric himself leaning against a tall column, his presence both commanding and intimate. "You think you can read me," he said, his voice low, "but even you do not know the depths of my anger, or my past."
Alicia straightened, though her heart raced. "I do not seek to know your past, Your Majesty."
"Pay, I only wish to understand the man before me." Eric studied her for a long time. There was a tension between them, electric and dangerous. He stepped closer, so close that the air between them seemed to hum. "Be careful," he said. "Curiosity can be as sharp as any blade." "I am careful," Alicia replied, "but even the sharpest blade can pierce darkness." His lips twitched in the hint of a smile, and then he stepped back. "Very well. I will watch. And you continue your lessons." Days turned into nights, and the subtle dance between servant and king deepened. Eric began testing her in small ways, placing obstacles before her and observing her reaction. Bear.
Each time, Alicia responded with courage, intelligence, and restraint. The talisman whispered guidance, but her own instincts guided her more than any magic.
Psst. One night in the gardens, once again Alicia watched the moonlight dance on the fountain's rippling surface. She had begun to notice that the king's anger, though ever present, was not unbreakable. His fury could be tempered, his decisions influenced, not by fear, but by understanding. She did not yet realize that the game she played was changing her as much as it was changing him. Her confidence grew, but so did her awareness of the danger. To sway the king was no small task, and the closer she came to his heart, the greater the risk of exposure. Arik appeared beside her without a sound, the shadows cloaking him like a second skin. "Do you think you understand me now?" he asked quietly. Alicia turned to him, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I understand pieces," she said. "But understanding is not control, Your Majesty." For a moment silence stretched between them. Then, Eric's hand brushed hers accidentally, or perhaps intentionally, on the edge of the fountain.
A spark of heat passed through her. A warning and a thrill all at once. "You are bold, Alicia," he said, his voice low, almost a growl.
Too bold, perhaps. And you are unpredictable, Your Majesty, she replied softly, a smile playing on her lips. The king's eyes narrowed, and then he laughed, low, dangerous, and mesmerizing. The sound echoed through the garden, mingling with the rustle of leaves and the whisper of water. For the first time, Alicia felt the truth of their connection. Not fear, not manipulation, but the start of mutual recognition. Bah. Yet, as always, the castle held secrets. From the shadows, someone watched. Someone who would not allow this bond to flourish. Bus. And the talisman, warm against Alicia's chest, pulsed as if warning her that the path she had chosen was fraught with peril. Suddenly, a voice called from the shadows, a warning, urgent and clipped. They are coming. Auric tensed instantly, his alpha instinct surging. Alicia's heart raced. Whoever was coming was not a messenger of peace. Something dark stirred in the corridors beyond, and the fragile tension between them snapped into alertness. Auric's hand found hers again, firmer this time, grounding her even as fear and adrenaline surged. "Stay close," he said, his voice both protective and commanding. Alicia nodded, clutching the talisman beneath her cloak. She felt the weight of the moment, the gravity of what they faced. Not only the threat outside the walls, but the storms inside the hearts of king and servant, storms that could burn everything if not tempered carefully. And as the shadows lengthened, bringing with them whispers of rebellion, betrayal, and secrets yet to unfold, both of them understood a silent truth. Their dance of power had only begun, and soon one misstep could change everything. Breaths. The castle's walls seemed to hum with an uneasy energy, as though they themselves had sensed the danger approaching. Alicia moved through the shadowed corridors, careful to avoid the nobles who whispered of rebellion and betrayal. Yet even in their secreted words, she felt a thrill. The castle was alive with challenge, and she had begun to feel alive in a way she never had before. King Eric watched her from the high balcony above the courtyard, his cloak flowing behind him like a dark storm. His eyes, usually sharp and commanding, held a strange tension, an acknowledgement of Alicia's growing influence and the pull she had over his temper. She had learned to temper his fury, not with magic alone, but with courage and subtle intelligence. And he was noticing it. The northern gate had been compromised. Scouts reported movement of unknown forces along the border, and tensions among the nobles were growing. The castle trembled not just with the threat of war, but with the fragile trust that had begun to form between king and servant.
"You have grown bold," Eric said as Alicia entered the council chamber, her cloak brushing the stone floor.
Breaths. Bold and wise beyond what a servant should be. Alicia lifted her head, holding his gaze steadily. "I serve because it is my duty, Your Majesty." But duty does not mean fear.
Eric studied her, the hint of a frown softening into curiosity.
There was a spark in her eyes he could not ignore, a flame that challenged his authority yet intrigued him. He had faced countless generals, courtiers, and advisors in his years as king, yet none had stirred him in this way. The nobles muttered among themselves as she poured water and distributed parchments, but Eric paid no mind. He was focused solely on her, sensing the subtle pull she had on the court and, more dangerously, on him. The talisman beneath her cloak glowed faintly, a heartbeat of magic that seemed to mirror her growing confidence and control.
Later that evening, the king summoned her to the gardens. The moon cast silver light across the fountain and the hedges, and the air smelled faintly of night-blooming flowers.
Arik leaned against a column, his expression unreadable. "You have been using the talisman," he said quietly, though not accusingly. "I can feel its influence. Do you understand what you are risking?" Alicia's hand pressed to the talisman beneath her cloak.
I do, Your Majesty. But it is not power that drives me. It is understanding.
"I want to know the man behind the throne." Arik stepped closer, the moonlight glinting on the sharp planes of his face. Band.
And if understanding comes too late, then we will face it together, she replied, steady and fearless. For a long moment silence stretched between them.
The night wind whispered in the hedges, carrying leaves and shadows in its wake.
Arik felt his anger, his caution, and even his loneliness bend toward her courage.
He had never allowed anyone this close, never anyone who dared to see the human beneath the crown. Their hands brushed accidentally, or perhaps deliberately, across the fountain's edge. The spark of touch sent warmth up Alicia's arm, and she felt the pulse of both the talisman and the king's suppressed emotions. She understood, more clearly than ever, that the game they played was no longer about control alone. Something deeper, unspoken, was emerging. But the castle never rested, and danger always lurked. That same night, a messenger arrived, breathless and pale, carrying news of a traitor within the castle walls. One of the nobles, eager to seize power during the king's distracted moments, had conspired with the northern forces. Arik's anger flared instantly, but Alicia's presence brought a subtle calm, nudging his decisions toward careful strategy rather than reckless fury. "You must trust me," she whispered, as they reviewed maps of the northern borders. "We can protect the kingdom if we act together." Arik's eyes softened, though his jaw remained firm. "I trust your judgment, Alicia." But trust alone does not prevent betrayal.
Over the next days, they worked side by side. Alicia's intelligence and the talisman's subtle influence guided the king's actions.
He began to rely on her insight, though he never admitted it aloud. Each shared plan, each quiet glance across war maps or council chambers, drew them closer. Bang. The tension between them grew, part mutual respect, part unspoken attraction, part the thrill of two strong wills entwined. One night, after a long day of strategizing, Arik asked her to remain in the library. The firelight flickered across the stone walls, casting dancing shadows that mirrored the turbulence between them. "You are clever, Alicia," he said, voice low and steady. "You see through walls where others see only stone. Yet cleverness can be dangerous if it leads you too close to me." Alicia approached the fire, feeling the warmth not just on her skin, but in her chest. "I do not seek to harm your majesty, only to understand." Arik moved closer, the tension between them palpable. "Understanding comes at a cost," he said. "Sometimes it burns, sometimes it cuts, and sometimes it changes everything." Her heart beat faster, and she knew he spoke not only of the palace intrigue but of the storm building between them. "Then perhaps it is worth the risk," she said quietly. The king's hand brushed hers as he reached for a map, and the contact sent an unspoken charge through the room. Neither spoke of it, yet both felt the subtle shift, the acknowledgement that their bond was no longer simply about king and servant. Something far more dangerous, far more compelling, was growing. But their focus could not remain on emotion alone. The traitor's plot had begun to unfold. Soldiers loyal to the rebellious noble attempted to infiltrate the castle under the cover of darkness. Arik's temper flared as he ordered defenses, but Alicia's guidance and calm influence helped him make calculated decisions instead of hasty ones. They moved through the castle together, silent shadows in the halls, commanding the guard with authority and precision. For the first time, they were equals, not by title, but by purpose. The talisman pulsed faintly beneath Alicia's cloak, a reminder of both power and danger. In the underground chambers, they discovered the rebel noble meeting with the spies. Eric's rage surged, but Alicia's calm voice guided him to patience. "Wait," she said. "Let us see the truth before you strike." The noble turned, eyes wide with fear and fury, and Eric's hand trembled on the hilt of his sword. But Alicia placed her hand on his arm, a grounding touch, and he stopped. The tension was electric, and in that moment trust passed silently between them. The battle in the castle's shadowed halls was brief but decisive. The conspirators were captured, their schemes undone. Yet the night left its mark on both. Arik and Alicia stood together in the aftermath, breathless, hearts pounding, surrounded by the silent stones of the fortress that had seen centuries of war and betrayal. "Why do you stay so close to me?" Arik asked quietly, his voice a mix of exasperation and curiosity. "Bet I stay," she said, meeting his gaze, "because I choose to, not because I am ordered." Bez. The words hung between them like a promise. For the first time, Arik saw her not as a servant or a tool, but as a person who could challenge him, understand him, and perhaps in time, change him. The castle, however, held more secrets than either of them could see. As they descended the stairs to the servant quarters, Alicia felt the talisman warm against her chest with a strange urgency. A shadow moved in the hall beyond their vision, silent but watchful. "Shoo! You feel it too," she whispered, not turning. "Back." Eric's eyes narrowed. "Yes, Raz. And it is not friendly." The unseen presence lingered, a reminder that even victories could be fleeting. Their bond, fragile and newly formed, had already attracted attention. Allies might be few, enemies many, and the dangers they faced were far from over. And yet, in the quiet that followed the chaos, there was a spark, a connection neither could deny. The fire between them had grown, tempered by challenge, danger, and mutual understanding. They were no longer king and servant alone. They were two forces intertwined by circumstance, choice, and the subtle influence of magic that neither fully understood. Alicia looked at Arik, her heart steady despite the pulse of adrenaline. "Bess, whatever comes," she said softly, "we face it together." Arik's hand brushed hers once more, firmer now, more intentional. Together, he agreed, though the word held a weight that neither could ignore. Besh. And in that shared moment, the castle seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the wind whispered through the towers, carrying the promise of storms yet to come. Within, two hearts beat in a dangerous rhythm, bound by trust, tension, and the unspoken knowledge that their story was only beginning.
The first light of dawn broke over the kingdom, painting the castle towers in gold and rose.
The storm of rebellion had passed, yet the air remained heavy with tension. Alicia walked through the quiet corridors, the talisman warm beneath her cloak, pulsing as if reminding her that destiny was not yet finished. King Arik moved beside her, silent and alert. He had never been so aware of her presence. Not just her cleverness or her subtle influence, but the courage that radiated from her. Together they had faced betrayal and danger, yet the night's trials had forged something stronger between them. Something unspoken, yet undeniable. A messenger arrived abruptly, breathless and wary. "My king," he said, bowing, "a shadow has been seen near the northern border. It moves with a power I cannot name." Arik's jaw tightened, and Alicia's heart skipped. The talisman pulsed faster, almost as if it knew. "Then we must see it for ourselves," Arik said. His voice held no fear, only determination. They moved through the castle gates swiftly, guards falling in line behind them. The wind carried the scent of wild grass and distant smoke. As they approached the northern fields, the shadow became clearer, a figure cloaked in darkness, moving with unnatural speed and power. Alicia's fingers pressed against the talisman beneath her cloak. The magic responded instinctively, weaving subtle influence to calm fear and sharpen awareness. Auric drew his sword, its steel glinting in the rising sun. "Stay behind me," he said, though his eyes never left hers. "I will not hide," Alicia replied firmly. "We face this together." The shadow halted, and a low, rumbling voice echoed across the fields. "So, the servant dares to stand with the king."
Do you truly understand the fire you play with?
Alicia felt the weight of the figure's presence. It was unlike any force she had encountered. Ancient, dark, and unyielding.
Best. Yet she stood her ground, feeling the talisman's warmth spread through her chest, connecting her courage to the king's strength. Auric stepped forward. "Show yourself," he commanded. "If you come with harm, you will not leave these fields alive." The figure stepped fully into the light. A man, or perhaps something older than man, with eyes that burned like embers and a presence that made the air tremble. The ground seemed to respond to him, bending under the weight of his anger and power.
Alicia's hand tightened on the talisman.
She felt a subtle pull, an influence she had never felt before, stronger, darker, and yet she knew she must resist. Her power was a guide, not a weapon of domination. She breathed deeply and spoke, her voice steady. "We do not seek battle unnecessarily, but we will not retreat from what must be faced." The shadowed figure tilted his head, as though amused by her courage. "Few have dared to speak to me like that," he said. "Few have not trembled before the king." "You are different." Eric's hand remained firm on his sword, but he did not move. He, too, recognized something ancient and dangerous in the figure before them. Base. Yet he did not retreat. His connection with Alicia gave him focus, a balance he had never known. The figure advanced, its power crackling in the air.
Eric and Alicia moved as one.
She whispered softly, guiding subtle influence to steady the king's emotions, to sharpen their combined instincts. The battle was not one of swords alone. It was of mind, spirit, and courage. The shadow lunged. Steel clashed, but Alicia moved closer, extending her influence, weaving calm into Eric's mind, strength into his arms. The figure paused briefly, caught in the pull of her courage and determination. For the first time it hesitated. "You wield a dangerous gift," it said, voice low, almost a growl.
Do you understand the consequences of bending the hearts of kings? I do, Alicia said firmly.
"Bet. And I use it only to protect, not to harm. Power is a responsibility, not a weapon of fear." The figure's eyes softened slightly. The energy surrounding him wavered. Eric seized the moment, his sword precise, yet he held restraint. They were not here to destroy unnecessarily. They were here to redeem, to balance, to face the darkness without losing themselves. In a flash of light and sound, the shadowed figure's form shimmered, revealing a truth long hidden. It was not an enemy, but a guardian of the old magic that had cursed the king years ago. "You have proven yourselves," it said, "not by strength alone, but by courage, understanding, and trust. Only then can the curse be broken."
Alicia's heart raced.
Bah. She had feared the talisman might manipulate the king forever, yet she saw now that it had guided them to something greater, a moment of true connection and redemption. Eric lowered his sword, looking at her with a mixture of relief and awe. You were right, he said quietly. Prayer, understanding, courage, and trust. These have done what my rage could not. The guardian nodded, fading into the morning mist. The threat had passed, leaving a quiet, almost sacred stillness. The fields were calm, the air lighter, and the sun climbed higher, bathing the kingdom in warmth. Alicia turned to Eric, her eyes meeting his. The tension between them, once sharp as steel, had softened into something far deeper. Respect had grown into trust, trust into admiration, and admiration into something fragile, delicate, and thrilling. Miss, you are free of the curse, she whispered.
But it took more than magic.
It took both of us. Auric reached for her hand, holding it firmly but gently.
You did more than guide me. You challenged me, strengthened me, and changed me.
I owe you more than words can say. For a long moment they simply stood, hand in hand, the weight of battles, both internal and external, lifting between them.
The castle behind them seemed smaller, the world beyond wider, and the bond they shared unbreakable. In the following days, the castle settled into a new rhythm. Nobles who had whispered against them were quieted by the king's renewed authority, tempered with fairness. Alicia's position in the court shifted, not by title, but by recognition. She was no longer merely a servant. She was a trusted advisor, a partner in strength and strategy. And Eric, for the first time, ruled not only with power, but with understanding and heart. They shared quiet moments in the gardens, where moonlight danced on fountains and leaves rustled in the breeze. Words were not always needed. Their connection was spoken through glances, gestures, and shared determination. The talisman, once a tool of subtle influence, rested quietly in Alicia's hands, a reminder of what had been and what they had accomplished together. One evening, atop the highest tower, Auric spoke softly. You tamed a king, he said, voice low but full of warmth. Yet you were never truly mine to command.
I could never have asked it, and you would never have given it.
But together, we became stronger than either of us alone. Alicia smiled, feeling the weight of the words. We did, and that is far greater than control. He drew her closer, the winds of the tower whipping around them, yet neither faltered. Their hands entwined, their hearts beating in a rhythm born of challenge, trust, and the trials they had faced together. Whatever comes next, Eric whispered, we face it as one. Not king and servant, but two hearts, sovereign and free. Alicia nodded, the talisman glowing softly in her palm. Bess, together, she repeated. The kingdom beneath them seemed quiet and safe, yet the air carried a hint of promise, a whisper that life would continue to test them, shape them, and reveal more mysteries. But in that moment, they had conquered fear, anger, and shadow. They had chosen trust over rage, courage over submission, and connection over control. As the sun rose fully, spilling gold across the towers, the storm of the past faded, leaving only the bond between Alicia and Eric, strong, resilient, and beautiful in its balance. The curse was broken. The shadows were faced, and in the heart of the castle, two people had discovered the true meaning of strength, trust, and love. The world outside would always hold dangers, as it always had.
Yet within the castle walls and within their hearts a new era had begun. A partnership of equals, forged in trials, tempered by trust and illuminated by the quiet, unwavering light of understanding.
And as they looked to the horizon together, the winds whispered across the towers, carrying one simple truth. They had not merely survived, they had transformed together.